Good evening, everyone. Ketki, thank you so much for this introduction, and I'm delighted to be moderating this session. Three individuals with very, very diverse professional and personal backgrounds, but bound by a very integrated and holistic approach to their collecting practices, which includes craft, textiles, design, and art. To share with you a little about the way we've decided to format this session, I will be individually introducing the three speakers by sharing a few images of works from their collection, after which we will have a brief chat with each of these collectors. After this introductory session with all the three collectors, we'll have a round of common questions, and at about 7:30, a little more than 45 minutes from now, we hope to open up the discussion to the guests who've joined us this evening. Monisha, I'd like to first introduce you. In many ways, we've been connected for almost 20 years. You've been traveling to the Ladakh region for 30 years and have built up a great specialization as a historian of textiles in the nomadic regions of Ladakh. Through that, you've also got a great insight into the culture, into the craft and design of the region. And if we could have the slides, I'd like to just go through a few of the images. Welcome to the session, Monisha. And thank you for being with us this evening from Ladakh. So one part of your collection has focused, if we could have the slide, the next slide. Give us a moment, we'll be right back. Monisha, you started your journey almost 3 decades back as an anthropologist. You went to Ladakh to research textile traditions and have very keenly collected textiles from the region of which we see here. These are from a very beautiful shoot for AD magazine for a special textile issue last year. If we have the next slide, please. Continuing with images from your collection from the region. These are 2 more images. If we could have the next slide. These textiles, which you saw in the previous slide, were almost all hand tie and dye textiles. If we could go back to the previous slide, please. Which were shot at the Ladakh Arts and Media Organization, Monisha, which you founded as a way to encourage and support contemporary art practices from the region and to give a platform to young and emerging artists from the region, many of whom have now gone on to create quite a name for themselves beyond the region as well. May we have the next slide, please? A more formal ceremonial textile, a velvet gyasar. If we have the next slide, please. Some of your textiles from the Himalayan region, which were shown at an exhibition on the gyasar, which is an Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition of textiles produced in Varanasi for the last 100 years. This was an exhibition that you curated in Mumbai in 2019 on the gyasar. The next slide, please. And this is a very rare gyasar from a very early period. You can see its drawing and its patterning is very, very special and peculiar. It's quite different from the kind of gyasar which is made today. So I hope you can tell us a little about this later as well, Monisha. I'm particularly quite interested in this. And beyond textiles, Monisha, you've also collected, beyond nomadic textiles, you have also written extensively about the Kashmir shawl. In fact, one of the books that you co-authored with Janet Rizvi has gone into a crazy number of editions and is widely regarded as a really important reference for the Kashmir shawl. So Monisha is also sharing with us 2 images from her collection of the Kashmir Kani shawl, a very sophisticated, labor-intensive technique which continues to be practiced even today. So I think what is interesting about several of the works that we're going to look at across the 3 collections and collecting practices is that many of these arts are living traditions. And I think in that way, we find a way to look at them from a certain angle as craft and as a living tradition. May we have the next slide, please? Some jewelry. Monisha, you also collected, as you traveled, you collected jewelry, objects, design, and craft. Objects of everyday use. And to end this part of the session in your introduction, a set of 3 works by a Ladakhi artist that you have that you've had a long association with. So, Monisha, tell us about the early years. Was there an epiphany? How did the journey of collecting begin? What drew you to this region and to this exciting world of design and art? You grew up in Bombay, if I'm right.
Yeah. But thank you, Mayank, and thank you, Asia Society, Lekha Poddar, whose collection I've admired for so many years. And also, no, I didn't grow up in Bombay, Mayank. I left Bombay as a very young child, maybe at the age of 5 or 6, for Iran. And we lived there right till 79, till the revolution. And But I think my collecting or my interest in arts and crafts probably started maybe with my parents, going to museums, going to heritage sites, going to see craft bazaars and things like that. So interested in things that were handmade. I think that's what I grew up with. I grew up with that interest. And then I think gradually going to boarding school in Missouri, I remember there used to be this shop under the clock tower. I mean, unfortunately, the clock tower in Missouri has now been demolished and rebuilt. But there used to be a elderly man who had an old shop under the clock tower, and Missouri was obviously one of the hill stations. And so, when a lot of people left, he had also sort of had a collection of old British furniture, crockery, plates, lights, maybe flower pots, things like that. And I remember often going in there, not so much to buy because I was a student in those days, but more to sort of talk to him, listen to his stories and things like that. I think my interest in textiles also came from a young age, or maybe from my grandmother, because I remember in her balcony in Tharapolewala mansion in Cuff Parade, where she lived, she would have a Singer's sewing machine and she'd always be stitching, sitting there stitching. And I think in those days, I'm talking about the 60s, the 70s, a lot of people would stitch their own clothes also. It wasn't that you just went to a shop and you could easily pick up what you wanted. So I think learning to stitch from her, then learning to knit, and then I spent a year learning to weave from the late Nellie Setna, when I decided what I was going to do was, study nomadic textiles. But I think the biggest influence in my life in collecting actually came from the Bhutanese and Tibetan historian Michael Aris, who was Aung San Suu Kyi's husband. And he was a mentor, and he was somebody I knew at Oxford very well. So when I told Michael that I was going out to Ladakh to study textiles, he told me, he said, you must collect. And he said that as someone working on material culture of a region, I would have the knowledge to collect because I was studying the subject. And one day I would have a collection that would represent the region, especially as, people's lives were changing. People were, sort of giving away or replacing old objects with new objects, metal and wood with plastic or, stainless steel and things like that. And he said, maybe one day my collection would, serve a purpose in Ladakh and in a community. I'm not sure if I've quite lived up to his word, but, I think, it was always his voice that would ring in my head. And it would always be like, start. So when I did start collecting, I started amongst the nomadic pastoralists amongst whom I was doing my field work in Eastern Ladakh. And I would just pick up small things, a saddlebag, a hat, a belt, small things. And I would Also, because I was studying and documenting, sometimes I would buy fabric or I would buy leather, and then I would take it to the hat maker or to the person who was an expert in making shoes. And I wanted to document the process. So I would also document the whole process as they made a hat for me or they made a pair of shoes for me. And then those items gradually came into my collection also. Then, over the years, I began to collect more textiles from different regions in Ladakh, and also trade textiles, because Ladakh was also a feeder, a southern feeder to the Silk Route. So you had textiles coming in here from Central Asia, from Russia, from Tibet, China, Afghanistan, Iran, Kashmir. So you could find, carpets from Yarkand and Khotan. You could find a Kashmiri shawl made up into a Ladakhi cape for a woman. You could find velvet from Uzbekistan, a tie-dye saddle cover from Tibet. So I gradually, as time went on, I gradually started acquiring, objects that were made in Ladakh, and also objects that had come into Ladakh through trade. And then also, along with items of dress, I collected jewelry. I like wearing the jewelry from the region, also the coral and the turquoise, and also some jewelry that came in from Tibet. Gradually, that also moved on to acquiring tools used in the production of textiles: needles, needle cases, spindles, pashmina combs, carding combs, and loom parts. And then later on, I think I've become so sort of, entrenched over here over the years. I've expanded my collection. I collected objects of daily use in Ladakh, some of which you showed: teapots, hookahs, milk pails, container for churning butter tea, wooden measures, containers for salt, for spices, ink pots, writing slates, and various other objects from here. And then, as you showed with the last slide, contemporary art. I think as I began working with Lamo and interacting with several contemporary artists from the region, I then began collecting contemporary art. So now, over a span of 10, 15 years, I have some, artists' early work and then moving on to later work from the region. So that's kind of been my trajectory of collecting, very sort of Ladakh focused, very, sort of Ladakh centric. Yeah.
Also an area which you've developed great expertise on, which is hugely valuable to the rest of us working on Indian textiles, South Asian textiles. Monisha, thank you so much for that insight. I'm going to now invite Lekha Poddar to join us. Lekha, good evening and welcome to this session. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. In many ways, my own curating practice as a textile my own practice as a textile curator has a lot to do with Lekha's encouragement and support. And I've had the great pleasure to collaborate with you, Lekha, to learn from you, and today to introduce you and to be able to share some of these insights with the guests today. Lekha Poddar needs no introduction to the international and South Asian art community. She has collected for more than 50 years, 5 decades, grew up in Calcutta, now lives in Delhi, co-founded the Devi Art Foundation with her younger son, Anupam Poddar. And since its inception, formal inception in 2008, the Devi Art Foundation has largely been known for South Asian contemporary art. But through this period, Lekha has supported commissions and textile projects that were not that well known until recently, when Devi Art Foundation focus has geared a little more towards textile. In the process, Lekha, you started collecting craft. If we could have some images, the first image of the slide. This is one of, you were sharing, this is one of your more recent acquisitions, Shruti Mahajan, who is a textile designer by training. If we could have the next slide, a work by Baran Iljal, on which she collaborates with her brother Munis Iljal to create the frames that you see, both Indian artists based in India. Lekha, I'm now sharing with the guests some images from your vernacular collection. And when you did present the vernacular in the contemporary in two parts at the Devi Art Foundation, it was iconic because since Dr. Jyotindra Jain had put out the argument of other masters in the 80s and 90s, nobody had really, no academic until that exhibition, it was curated by Annapurna Garimella, had actually attempted a redefinition of folk and tribal art, and the idea of the vernacular, of vernacular contemporary practices was something that it was introduced in the vocabulary of art discussion and craft discussion, and since then has caught on as an important word or reference that is used. We could have the next slide, please. The next few slides are images that represent the living traditions, the vernacular Varli artist, a contemporary Varli artist, Bhuri Bai, famous Bhuri Bai, who worked very closely with J. Swaminathan at the Bharat Bhavan. Exquisite wood sculptures, Bhuta sculptures from, if I'm not wrong, Karnataka, Lekha.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, I may ask you already to share with you that story that you shared with us some time back about arriving at this temple where the Bhuta sculptures were actually used. So if you can share that, that'll be great. Riveting story. If we could move on, the slides. It's a triptych, 3 textiles from the Asha workshop, which was also founded with Lekha's patronage and support in the early 1990s. This was set up by scholar and textile designer Rahul Jain to revive textile techniques that actually had been extinct in the world for almost 2 centuries. So textiles that were associated with the Mughal court, with the Safavid court, with the Ottoman workshop. And this triptych was presented also in an exhibition, Lekha, that you did, which was a retrospective at the National Museum in Delhi on Mr. Rahul Jain's work. These are golden metallic textiles with silk, using a very intricate weave called the samit, which is a very ancient technique of weaving now being produced in very, very small quantities across the world, in just 3 workshops, perhaps 3 looms in the world. And with that, we move on, Lekha, to draw attention to your constant commissioning of textiles. This particular work was commissioned as part of an exhibition that I had the privilege to co-curate, Fracture. In 2015, it emerged out of a 3-4 year process of commissioning, inviting a sculptor, Sachin George Sebastian, to think of a textile-based work, and he used Bakram and these interlocking units, which sort of are endless to shape and fashion and mold, these very incredible dramatic textiles, which are almost architectural. And another textile from those commissions, if we could move to the next slide, please. A work by Swati Kalsi, who works with the communities of Sujni embroiderers in Bihar. Massive 5.5 meter long commission that took incredible 2-3 years to make. But this exhibition was only, Lekha, since, I've observed you keenly commissioning since as well and before. You have continued to identify and be fascinated by living traditions of textiles and craft, and you're constantly commissioning for your collection. And whenever there's an opportunity, you do show those pieces. So this was also a reflection of something that was fairly consistent from the early years of your own collecting journey. And if we could move to the next slide, please. Right. So Lekha, if I may come to you. Again, same question as Monisha. I think all of us would love to hear about this incredible journey and what was the epiphany? How did you start? What were the initial years? Would love to know more. What were those moments like?
Thank you, Asia Society, and thank you, Mayank, for this really elaborate introduction. I think I really woke up to our rich tradition of textiles and crafts and heritage when I saw an exhibition of the festivals of India in New Delhi. I think it was in the late 1980s or early 1990s. And it just sort of completely opened my eyes to what we had in our country. And I think I was also very, very lucky to have very good mentors. Mayank Singh, who was I think one of the irreplaceable textile historians. And I mean, not a historian really, but he was really a textile maker, a revivalist of textiles. He was somebody I would go, and every time I would some dealer would come to me with a piece of textile, I'd first go show to him and check if this was really worth buying or not. As far as crafts goes, I think I was very lucky to have Jyotendra Jain. I would go to the Crafts Museum often, and he would show me some extraordinary works, all of which I did not understand because I really had not seen this kind of art before. And but he would call me up once in a while and turn around and say, Lekha, just come over and see this artist's work. So a couple of them was, I mean, I didn't meet Jangar there, but I met many people from the Gone tradition later on at the Crafts Museum. One particular person, of course, he really sort of encouraged me to go and, sort of buy his works was Kalam Patwa from Bengal. And that really started my journey of looking into crafts. And at the Crafts Museum, they changed all the craftsmen. They have a tradition of inviting craftsmen in the little crafts village. And every month, there would be a new set of craftsmen there. So it was very interesting to go back once a month and just look at what new craftsmen would be there or would not be there. And slowly I started to buy from them. And of course, in those days, there was nobody buying. So if I bought one work, I think 15 artists would come chasing me to my car to say that, now you have to please buy this for, 100 rupees, 200 rupees. So, I mean, my journey started there. And from the Crafts Museum, I mean, a lot of the collection that I made on the vernacular and the crafts was because of just visiting the craftsmen at the Crafts Museum. And it became a substantial collection. And at some point, I met Annapurna Garamale, and she was very interested in the crafts tradition, our living traditions and things like that. So we sat and chatted and discussed that, how could we get them to make contemporary things, because I think what they make traditionally is still that's what they continue to make. Most of the craftsmen, most of the guys who do the paintings which are from the tribal areas or whatever it is, but we wanted to do something, tried to push them into a contemporary realm. Some of them have taken that leap. Some are still stuck where they are, but it's been an amazing journey. So you were mentioning that, I should talk about the Bhuta sculptures.
Yes.
That was very interesting. I had gone to the temple in Karnataka, which is a Bhuta temple. I forget the exact name of the temple, but I went there first time and I was absolutely taken aback by seeing these. First of all, there was nobody there. It was, I think, my friend Rahul Jain and I had gone on this little trip between Manipal and Udupi for 3 days. And we walk into this temple, there's no one there. You go from little shrine to little shrine, you see these dark images which are painted wood, And you can't figure out what they are, half man, half woman, half male, half female. We tried to find out who made these sculptures. Could we get them made again? And we were directed to somebody who we went to meet the person, and the person was making wooden furniture. So I was completely taken aback by saying, oh my God, I mean, but he's making these fantastic Bhuta sculptures, and what is this? And he said, I mean, I can make only those sculptures for the temple. I cannot make it otherwise. So I have to have a livelihood. So making furniture was his livelihood. I, of course, couldn't do anything about it then. I went back to the temple a year or two later. They have a whole row of, I think, about 100 odd sculptures, which are lying discarded because they must have been damaged somewhere. And then, having picked out and seen what I liked from there, went back to the craftsman and said, okay, these are the things that we liked. So would you be able to make it for us? And he was, of course, very kind, and he's made those sculptures for our collection. And I think it's also very interesting about the Natarajas that you showed. A friend of mine had sent me 2 pieces of these of the lost wax cast Natarajas, which are still being made from I think Coimbatore. And I had them lying in my home and in the living room. And somebody who would know this very well, who's a great art historian, came to the house, and he picked up the pieces and turned around and said, oh, wow, these do look Chola bronzes, So I was quite taken aback. I knew exactly what they were because my friend had already told me that they were being made now. So I just thought that it would be very interesting to commission the 108 statues that are the different poses, the mudras, from the Natya Shastra. So that whole set has the entire collection of the mudras of Bharatnatyam. And I think similarly, I mean, the textile journey started, bought things from the festivals of India, and they had an exhibition at Rabindra Bhavan, and then another exhibition at Intact. And that was the journey where I just started to buy what was being produced for festivals of India. But later on, when Devi Art Foundation decided that we would do a textile show instead of doing a contemporary art show all the time, you were part of that curatorial team, you, Sanjay Garg, Rahul Jain, and we know that we worked on that for about 3 years to 4 years to get virtually about 16 to 18 pieces of textiles, where we wanted to ask practitioners or non-practitioners. Actually, most of them were not even practitioners of textile, in the textile medium. They were graphic artists, they were fashion designers, there were all kinds of different people. And the one brief that we did give them was that they had to use the textile traditions that we had in the country, but they could not make fashion or any garment with it. So it was quite an interesting journey, because we did this exhibition called Fracture, which had about 18 to 20 pieces of different kinds of textiles, which were quite structural in a way, and they were installations rather than any kind of small, I mean, even small, not even small pieces. And that thing that you showed about of Swati Palsi, Swati, who does this Sujni embroidery from Bihar, had conceived of this as though it would be a shell. It was all about feminism, and she wanted this as to be a shell, and she wanted it as a, I mean, journey from the womb to maturity and all of that kind of stuff. And then we had a rather anguished discussion with her because we didn't like it.
Lekha, I was wondering if we could come back to this and other stories a little later.
Yep.
Just going to request Mr. Fernando, but thank you so much, Lekha. We have Monisha's interest, which has formalized into Ladakh and Ladakh Arts and Media Organization. She writes prolifically. Lekha, you have formed, again, an institution like the Devi Art Foundation to give the collecting practice a certain kind of form, a formality, and to also help dissemination of the collection with the wider public. We now move to another very fascinating person, someone I've been a very huge fan of. And I'm so happy to be in this conversation with him, Mr. Fernando, who joins us from Colombo. Mr. Fernando's collecting practice has very interestingly overlapped with his establishment and shaping of an iconic brand for Sri Lanka. I would say it's an iconic South Asian brand called Paradise Road. Must see, a must visit to everyone who visits in Colombo. It's something that nobody can miss. If we could have the slides, please. Mr. Fernando, welcome to this evening. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
May we have the slides, please? Mr. Fernando, we're going to show a few images from your very, very famous and extraordinarily curated home. You mentioned you have an interest in mixing antiquities with vintage, furniture, design, contemporary art, craft. And through Paradise Road, you've also been very involved in taking forward the living traditions and craft of Sri Lanka forward. Great images to give us a sense of how you juxtapose and bring elements together in this very original, super contemporary way. May we have the next slide, please? Images, some more images of the residence. Mr. Fernando, you were sharing that these walls, this gallery in your home is full of artists who represent the modern period in Sri Lanka. We then move into another image of images of Lionel Wendt, the Sri Lankan photographer. This is the entrance, the art gallery to Paradise Road, the Gallery Cafe. I was just there this weekend and there was another fantastic show of an emerging young artist. Few other images of corners of Paradise Road. Few more images of the Gallery Cafe. Of the Paradise Road Hotel. With this very interesting juxtaposition of furniture, the Corbusier chairs with the carpets. Right, Mr. Fernando, again, all of us would love to know what inspired this journey of collecting, this incredible journey of taste making. Please share with us those early years. You were sharing earlier that you returned from education, from abroad, and you got immediately immersed into this very interesting new wave in Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you. Now, all of this is very interesting for me, and I don't know where to begin. You see, from a very young age, I was interested in art, and I was fortunate enough to have a mother who supported me and encouraged me to paint. And right throughout my school career, I won the art prize. For the 10 years that I was in school, every year I carried an art prize. My mother never came for a prize giving because she said I was winning prizes for talent and not for efforts. But anyway, she encouraged me and she took my paintings to the likes of George Keats to find out what she should do with me. And he said, just buy him paint and let him paint on his own. Don't send him to art school. So that was the start of it. But unfortunately, at the age of 15, I lost my mother. And by the time I was 19, I lost my father. So I'm actually a self-made man who loved art, who all my life was around art. And at the age of 20, I bought my first original painting from Lucky in Lanka. And that painting traveled with me everywhere because I left Sri Lanka when I was 22 and I went to the Netherlands and I lived there for 3 years. Then I moved to New Zealand. Then I moved to Australia. But I must say, when I was in Australia, I was in the hotel industry. In Australia, I got very, very addicted to Australian art, but I never bought any paintings because they were not relative to me. I bought my paintings, the only 2 paintings that I brought from Australia were from an artist called Donald Friend, who had links with the Bauer family in Sri Lanka. Now, from there, I moved back to Sri Lanka in 1987. And I was going to run my business, which was importing child-oriented giftware in Australia. I was going to run it from here, but it all became very boring because doing things remote control is not me. And I was very frustrated, and I'm a workaholic. So I discovered a little store 3 months after we arrived in Sri Lanka, and I decided that I'm going to give Sri Lanka a new look. And I opened Paradise Road, a little shop where I started buying things that were absolutely, or creating a taste for monochrome, which was me, and developing things, buying old furniture, buying craft, designing craft. And I had I was exposed to an exhibition that an artist did here called Tilak Samarikrama, who was funded by the ILO, one of these organizations, to develop craft. And there was a wonderful exhibition where I was able to see what the Sri Lankan craftsmen were capable of. And I started working with these craftsmen and I developed product for Paradise Road. And that was the beginning. So a lot of craft, may be brass, may be ceramic, wood. And I also started collecting antiques, and I was dealing in antiques. So this is how my collection started growing. And I personally collect Dutch period antiques because they're simpler and more sophisticated. And there's wonderful woods like calamander, which is rare, that is so beautiful. And really, we had influences from all those, when we were colonized by all those countries. And actually, it's the Dutch period which is most sophisticated. Then, after that, I had the opportunity of leasing Mr. Jeffrey Baba's office. He leased it to me, and I told him I was going to run a gallery because that was the only way I thought I could bait him into leasing his beloved property. And I was going to open a gallery with a cafe attached. Today, the Gallery Cafe is actually a restaurant with a gallery attached. Now, this gallery has given me an opportunity, or gave me the opportunity, to develop art in this country. You see, when I discovered an artist, if I found somebody having talent, I would support them and get them to create works, because it was very raw. At that time, it was very difficult. We're talking about 1998. People didn't have collections. I mean, the Sri Lankan artists are poor, and they can't even afford to put an exhibition together. So I had to support them, and encourage them. And I only chose art that I liked, that suited the space of Jeffrey Barber's office. From there, when I discovered an artist, I started buying paintings from them and then giving them exhibitions. And there are lots of success stories that I'm very proud of. I mean, then I would go to, exhibitions of Sark country, art camps, where you would have Indian artists, Pakistanis coming, and Bangladeshi artists to these art camps, and then they have an exhibition. And there is where I was able to discover Ali Kazim. Ali Kazim had his first international solo show with me. Now, why I'm mentioning this is the greatest joy that I got in my life was to find out that something that I discovered became so great in the world. Now, most of the artists that I have shown for the last 25 years at the Gallery Cafe have all succeeded. And today they're well sought after. And by running this gallery, I was able to collect myself. I mean, I can remember at the beginning, as I was telling you, it was hard to find art. I was able to get a collection of George Keats photographs. And, sorry, not George Keats, Lionel Went. I went to this person who was dealing in them, and I bought them very cheap. And I had this exhibition, which is a huge success. And I started collecting these also. And today, Lionel Went, after that, Lionel Went has become, now those are the joys that I get in collecting. The demand that is created thereafter. Now, also, I love finding things in places and creating a taste for it. As you can see from my Instagram posts, I'm very honest with my anecdotes so that you know how it all came together and what it does to me. So my life has always revolved around art, collecting antiques, collecting craft, developing craft, whether it be batik. Now, batik in Sri Lanka was all with swirls and curves, and I went geometric. And if you walk into Jeffrey Barber's house, you would find that the diagonal stripe that I started Paradise Road with is very prominently put in his living room. So all these things are things that give me joy, that I feel that I succeeded with.
Mr. Fernando, you did this particularly with the batik in Sri Lanka, which was more decorative, and you transformed it.
Absolutely, absolutely. There were wonderful batik artists like Ina de Silva, and you see Barbara Sanzoni as well did wonderful weaving with beautiful color. But then here was Udayshanth Fernando coming with his monochrome, very, black and white. And I made a statement, and that statement stayed for the last 36 years of running Paradise Road.
Thank you so much for this fascinating, this sharing of this fascinating journey. I'd like to now invite Lekha and Monisha, all three of our panelists, in a joint discussion. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is that, all three of you have spent time outside of your countries. You are very closely in touch with developments in design, art across the world. Do you think this is a particularly South Asian phenomena, this interest in collecting while commissioning the living traditions, whether they're handmade crafts or whether textiles? Do you think this is an aspect that is very peculiar or specific to South Asian collectors and collections? Anyone could take that question. Lekha, would you like to go first?
I do think we have an opportunity in our part of the world because it's still, first of all, I think in India, Sri Lanka, we have the traditions still continuing, and they are still affordable. I'm sure Mr. Fernando would also sort of agree that in the times when he started, and even till now, whatever he's doing and what he's selling in his shop is affordable, because we can still find all the crafts. I mean, in India, I think all the traditions are pretty much intact. Yes, of course, some have died down, but I would say, I don't know if Monisha agrees or not, but I would still say that if we start to really dig deep, we will still find that one lone traditional craftsman or one lone traditional weaver who will still be carrying on a tradition which has been going on for the past 80, 100 years. So I think we are very lucky that, we're now part of the world, that we have these traditions still continuing. How much we make use of them in a contemporary way, or the traditional way, it's up to us. But I'm a great fan of Mr. Fernando. I was just in Sri Lanka 2 days ago. Before boarding my flight, I had to go to Paradise Road, and I had to go and grab some of those beautiful batiks and take my flight back home. And yes, we are lucky.
Monisha, any thoughts?
I don't think it's just having lived abroad that you then come back and then you appreciate what you have here. I think it's also the exposure that you have here, the travel that you can do. You can, travel. I remember, as a student studying at Xavier's at the time, we would, I would take any opportunity to travel, whether it was the Andaman Islands or to Bihar or to Kerala or whatever. And as you travel, you see things. And I think, you see people still using objects that, we say would be craft or designed, artisanally designed objects. And as Lekha said, we still find artisans in this country. We still find that weaver, the potter, the jeweler, the metal worker. And even in a place like Ladakh, we still find, there are many artisans here working. Maybe the numbers have dropped, but there's still a demand for handmade. And then some of that is translated into contemporary work. And I think that's where we see the continuities in art and craft that, we're also talking about this evening.
Where I'm concerned, in Sri Lanka, as you say, there are craftsmen who are capable of doing wonderful work, but they have no idea. What I have been doing with Paradise Road is directing them and designing for them. Like, if somebody comes to me and shows me what they do, I only look at their ability. And with that ability, I design for them. Every single thing that I sell at Paradise Road, I'm behind. So that's the reason why you see a sort of timelessness in the designs that I have created for today. Like the stripes that you're talking about, the batik that you're talking about, even the ceramics that I sell in the shop. So I have, blacksmiths coming to me, I have potters coming to me, I have weavers coming to me, but all I do is control the style, the image that I created to have an identity. And that is the thing that is so fulfilling that, I don't use a computer. I just do a little sketch and tell them that I want it like this. And then they bring a sample and the order comes thereafter. And this is what I've been doing with Paradise Road for 36 years, developing craft, and also with the Gallery Cafe, with Yard Gallery, developing art. And tomorrow I'm opening an exhibition of R.M. Naim. R.M. Naim was the guru of Ali Kazim. And after Ali Kazim, I gave R.M. Naim an exhibition in 2006. Ali had his exhibition in 2003, and he's returned now, and he stayed with me for a month, and he's opening an exhibition tomorrow, which is fantastic. Now, I'm so thrilled that I'm able to, support this type of thing, and also expose Sri Lanka to more sophisticated art that comes from elsewhere. I've tried very hard to bring Indian art to Sri Lanka, but it's always been very, very difficult because I have to go through dealers. And that's a problem. I mean, I have an artist that I love in India that I discovered called Chandra Bhattacharya, that I have several paintings from. And I think he's got great promise. And I've always wanted to have an exhibition of his here. And I've not been able to because I can't access him, even though my daughter met him in Delhi recently. So that's it. You know, we have to encourage people, expose, also show the Sri Lankan artists what the rest of Asia is doing. And that's what I try to do.
I think another question that some of our guests may be interested in is that when you started collecting diverse kinds of creative media and practices, there wasn't the kind of market that exists for them today. I mean, Lekha, people like Jangar Sham, who Ribai today fetch huge, prices at auctions. So have you noticed certain trends in the way the market has sort of evolved for this? Has it matured? Do you think that there's more interest over the years in these kinds of collecting practices? Are there any thoughts to reflect on how you see the evolution of the market? Is there an increase in the kind of collectors and number of collectors interested in these living traditions?
I think they are. I think there are a couple of galleries which are now dedicated to, showing arts of just the living traditions, less of crafts. I think they suffer. But the artists who can sort of paint on paper, on other mediums, are certainly being shown by specialized galleries, and they're coming into auctions. So some of them are making their mark there, as you said, Jan Barshin. I think mainstream galleries are also now looking into showing living artists from living traditions. So yeah, I think they're making a mark, and I think the young are sort of looking at it. Although I think the explosion of the young contemporary artists is just unbelievable.
Monisha, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I think from the Himalayas, I think Buddhist art has always had a market. Maybe not so much in India, but in the West for sure. I mean, you have the Rubin collection, you have the Hiramanik collection, you have big collectors of Buddhist art, mainly religious Buddhist art, thankas, bronzes, statues, things like that were collected. In India, we've seen much less of that. In my own collection, I touched on sort of sacred art. It was more secular art. And I mean, is there a big, sort of market for art from Ladakh? No, I don't think there's a huge market. I think what I collect is more also for ethnographic reasons and for, and just for documentation of earlier. There are less than weavers here. There may be less metal workers. So one day, some of the things will also. I don't think, but I think one of the things that Ladakhis themselves have been realizing in Ladakh, because they've also so much has left the region, is that they're also now trying to keep what's left over here. So you have collections like, Jigmit Kotier, right? Who has a small private museum. So people here have also been now acquiring things from Ladakh and keeping it here so that it stays here. So we've seen that change in the last sort of shift in the last 10 years with.
And are there young contemporary art collectors who are buying Ladakh art from Ladakh and art created by Ladakhi contemporary artists, the kind that you're showing in Lama? Is that something that's also a development?
I think the market is very new. The market over here is very new. The understanding of contemporary art in the region is also very new. We're talking about something that's only about, let's say, 10 or 15 years old. So I think it has, it definitely has a future going forward. But I think it's still very new to say, who is this market for? Is it for people from Ladakh? Is it from people outside Ladakh? It's too soon to talk about that. Yeah.
Mr. Fernando, any thoughts?
You see, Sri Lanka was very fortunate that in the 1960s, there was a movement that was started by Jeffrey Bawa. And he created a style, and he had people who helped him, like Ina De Silva and Barbara Sanzoni, and the artist Lucky Sen, who actually created a style that people were following. That is what everyone, even myself, I was influenced by them. I belong to that era. And, they brought in, they gave Sri Lanka a style of living, an identity. And everyone was trying to do this. And now, when I came back, after having lived away for 16 years, I changed it in a way by going monochrome and simpler. Less was more. Not too much color. And my belief is that, you have a monochrome background and the color comes from the objects that you put in. So this became a style and a Paradise Road identity, which is very, very obvious and evident today in Colombo. My doing in 36 years.
Another question that I think has come up repeatedly in the Q&A, and if we could open this up to the discussion now, is I think the couple of people who would like to know what is your advice on young collectors and starting to collect. So if we could be great if we could have the three of you reflect on that. Any advice, any tips on how to begin collecting?
Collecting art is subjective, right? Isn't it?
Any thoughts? Am I audible?
Yeah. I think you have to begin with something that you're really passionate about. That you're passionate about, that maybe you understand, or if you don't understand, maybe you can seek out somebody who can explain things to you. Like, Lekha was saying, she would go to Jyotendra Jain or Ma. I think in my case, there were people here in Leh that I would talk to, or people like, Jesleen Nameja, whom I knew closely. So I think, to have people around you that you can talk to about something and having a passion for something. I think whether or not you have the finances. I know that, as a young student in Ladakh, sometimes I couldn't pay for things that I liked. So people would let me pay them in installments. Sometimes I would pay over the years also. So people were kind here in that sense. And also, I think some of the people here who knew that I was collecting and knew that I was not a dealer, and so I was collecting for a collection, would also sometimes keep things for me. If I would come back the next year, they would say, okay, we've kept this for you, or maybe you're interested in this, or so it was very nice, at one time over here I'm talking about the 90s and the early 2000s, when you could still find things up here to buy.
Lekha, am I audible to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question was that some of the questions are repeating the same sentiment in the Q&A box, which is, if you had any tips or advice to give to young collectors, to someone starting out, would you have any thoughts on that or any tips?
I think there's no better learning than constantly seeing and seeing and developing. And it's not just looking. I think you have to see. There's a difference between that. And the more you see, the more you learn. And obviously through that, you have to be, slowly you develop a passion for whatever it might be. And whatever that passion is, keep looking more and more and more and more from the same genre or from, to me, the more you see around the world and all kinds of art, more you learn. I think the vision should be a large vision, and then you can just decide what you can pick from there. And that can, you can just go around and look at whatever you can, good, bad, ugly, no matter what it is. I think that's how you start to discern make a discerning choice.
We have a very specific question from Dr. Furhan Ahmed, who himself is a leading ceramic collector from Pakistan, and he wants to know if you have any thoughts about such collecting practices in India and Sri Lanka, about people or collections that are focused on ceramics, contemporary ceramics, and if you do, if you could share a few thoughts about that. Mr. Fernando, you've extensively worked with clay.
My interest initially in ceramics in Sri Lanka were antiques from the Dutch period that came from China, which have so much, that's so beautiful. And then contemporary, I think when we're talking about contemporary Sri Lankan ceramics, they're influenced a lot by what is happening in the rest of the world. I mean, if you take even at Paradise Road, if you look at some of the designs that we have, checkerboard designs on plates, all these are very international designs that are being produced with a Sri Lankan touch. So, I mean, I can't say we are known for contemporary ceramics, but you can find the most beautiful antique ceramics in Sri Lanka.
In India, we have Devi Prasada's collection, which was ceramics and contemporary. I don't know if there are more now, but other people also, I think there are a few other collectors who have just focused on contemporary ceramics.
And we have designers, if I may step in, we have designers like Gunjan Gupta, product designers like Gunjan Gupta, who are collaborating with traditional potters as well. So this is also something that's very exciting. I mean, India hosted, I think, the first Triennale of ceramics in Jaipur, if I'm not wrong, in 2019. And there's an organization, and they're fairly organized and very cohesive groups from the Blue Pottery Group, which is based between Delhi and Andreta in Himachal, to Pondicherry, which has a very exciting community of potters. So India does have very interesting, one very well-known name is Ray Maker, who is known for his ceramic work. He's also based in Pondicherry in Auroville, and he has a studio called Golden Bridge. So there is exciting work happening across the country. Lekha, we were together recently in Hampi, and we saw the CSR project that JSW Group has started on the black pottery of the region.
Super.
So I think that's been quite interesting. You have design galleries now like the Mumbai-based ECO, which is encouraging a lot of designer and craftsman interaction. So I think this is a fairly... I think Annapurna Garimella also edited a special issue for Marg magazine on ceramics, on the post-independence or contemporary history of ceramics. So I think we have a lot of very interesting work that's happening in ceramic. Christine Michael is a very well-known ceramic curator and ceramist who's also widely collected. We have an interesting question, and maybe with that we might need to close because we just have another 5 minutes. We have more than 15 questions, and I'm so sorry to our guests for not being able to accommodate them. But we have a question from Gopesh Singh. I'm sorry, Tarini, I seem to have lost the question. Yeah, I've got it. We have Gopesh Singh from Delhi, who's an experienced curator, who writes, the South Asian region is undergoing economic and social ferment. How do you think this is affecting the making and collection of art, craft, and textile? Like in India, while on the positive side, a lot of stolen art is being returned to the country, the cultural narrative is actively being refashioned. I'd love a response from all four of you, if possible. I think the main question is, how do you see this is affecting the making and collection of art and craft? If anyone would like to take that question.
Yes, it is being refashioned, certainly. I mean, we are in such times. But I think, I mean, the textiles, I don't think get particularly affected. Neither do the crafts. The art, I think from whatever I have seen in galleries and the art fair and things like that, I don't know how much censorship they go through now. But there are lots of young artists who are doing absolutely amazing work. That's what I can see now. What was happening in the 90s has sort of, there was a lull in the mid 2000, I mean, from particularly after the 2008 crash. The art market seems to be bouncing back.
And to add to that, Lekha, I think there's a lot of private enterprise which has come up, the number of private foundations, not-for-profit entities, residencies. So I think there's a lot of, there's palpably a lot of very interesting conversation which is being reflected there. A lot of the art is also material-based, which is something that is very refreshing and interesting to see. The importance of handmade and hand craftsmanship has come back, and the intersections between the so-called craft, design, art, and vernacular have possibly been never closer in the post-independence period, or perhaps after the early decades of independence. I can speak from the perspective of India. We have actually time for just another question from Jay Davidson. How about art museums? Have you seen museums of contemporary art spaces in India or Sri Lanka following your lead in seeing craftspeople and non-professional artists as making an important contribution to visual culture? If I may just quickly add to this conversation, you have an extraordinary organization like MAP, which has opened in India, in Bangalore, which also has a very diverse collection which transcends textiles, craft, photography, vernacular, and modern contemporary art and antiquities. Over to you. Mr. Fernando, would you like to? Have you seen museums of contemporary art spaces in India?
There is a museum in Sri Lanka, but it's still very new and it hasn't developed. I mean, we've got problems in our country at the moment, so I don't see much development happening because people are a bit scared. You understand what I mean? So, but it will. It'll happen. It'll take a little time.
And I think here also in India, along with you have MAP, you have Kiranadar Museum opening now. You have people also showing their private collections, maybe at gallery spaces rather than museums. I think the private museum still has a certain time to still emerge in this country. I mean, it's beginning with MAP, and maybe, we'll see.
There's another one opening in Bangalore on antiquities, a private collection. And there's something that's opened in Porbandar. Mehta has opened his collection there in a little museum. And I think we keep hearing murmurs of more maybe foundations, art spaces, private collections being made more public. It might not be a museum, as Kiran's and MAP is certainly going to be. But there are sort of murmurs that there's smaller museums or private collections being opened to the public in some way or the other, which is happening.
Yeah, there's also, for instance, Praful and Shilpa Shah, who constantly have exhibitions of their textile collection. The latest one in Bombay in February at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum. So I think we still see private collections, coming into public spaces.
Yeah.
I can say from having observed vernacular in the contemporary Lekha that the number of private galleries that actually and collectors who started taking an interest in the vernacular has increased since then. So in that sense, to also answer a part of the question, I think certainly, Lekha, I think that whenever Devi Art Foundation has presented exhibitions of certain kind of thinking or leadership, I see it very visibly affecting the entire ecology from writers to curators gallerists, and to artists. Thank you so much, Mr. Fernando, Monisha, Lekha. This has been an absolutely wonderful session. I think we can go on, and the evening wouldn't end. There's so much more to learn from all three of you. There's so much more to hear from you. And I really hope that both personally and through the Asia Society, we continue to have the chance to interact with you consistently and with the same affection that we've received from you today. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Asia Society.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayank.
Thank you.